we're recording another episode of It's Not What You Think. I'm here with Rick.
And this is Darren.
And I got an email / text from a friend of mine, and he directed me to an article. And the article was bringing back one of our very first episodes, that a contemporary group has made a modern day recording of the oldest melody that we have known to man, so to speak.
Yes.
It is the Hurricane Hymn. Or they gave it more than one name, so it's a little confusing. The Hurricane Hymn, or maybe the subtitle is the Hymn to Nicole. Whether you want to give it did you listen to it? Let's give it a listen.
Yeah, sure.
I actually was mistaken and thought there was some electronic ambient synthesizer-y type of stuff in the background, but I'm corrected, and they play only traditional ancient instruments.
They try to play all the traditional instruments, yep.
Remind us of the band?
They're called Heilung, and I could be mispronouncing that, but it's Heilung. Heilung.
With an umlaut?
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay.
On one of the, I wouldn't know which one, probably an
N. Okay. But despite that very minimal instrumentation, an emphasis on the vocals, which they wanted to really bring the melody to the foreground, and I think they did a really good job of it. Their harmonies were beautiful. Although there's someone yelling out there and saying it's a monophony, not a harmony.
Sure.
But it was. I thought it was very nice.
Yeah, it's neat, and this band, they're actually a really cool band. That they're trying to revive the sort of ancient traditions of making music, which is why they tend to be, in terms of the instrumentation, more classical. And their performances are really, really neat. I really recommend looking up one of their performances.
Right on. Now the article mentioned that the band focuses on reviving and reconstructing ancient melodies and music with a kind of contemporary sound. And they brought up the oldest musical instrument, the bone flute.
Yeah.
When we did our episode, they were eagle's bones, and they were dated 40,000 BC, and I was completely impressed with that.
Yeah.
But they say now since we've done it, they said a bone flute they found that is dated 50,000 years BC from a bear bone.
Oh, wow.
So, and I remember you saying in that episode that even though we found something in 40,000, there's still probably even earlier evidences of musical instrument making. And you were right.
Yeah. And I would hazard to guess that the earliest known instrument, well, besides the rocks, right?
Right.
You sort of think of the evolution of music starting with rhythm. But if they're hunting birds, they know that birds make calls. I'm sure that they've dissected a bird at some point and taken its bones out and probably pulled something out of the throat pipe, the windpipe of a bird, and blew into it. How did this bird make a sound? There it is. Yeah. There's the bird making a sound.
Yeah, imitating the bird. I still think it's a fascinating leap of intelligence to then not only then go one step further and put holes in it to create different musical notes.
Yeah, you have to be somewhat precise about that.
Yeah, no kidding. That's fantastic. And then they also mentioned in the article that the currently the oldest instrument is the bone flute. 50,000 years. That's we said 40,000. 50,000 isn't just a year before. It's 10,000 years before.
Right,
It's
right.
just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So I'm getting over the mind-boggle, and so the article mentions that the earliest documentation of music that we have is tuning a lyre. And so it's not necessarily any musical composition, but it's instructions on how to tune a lyre,
Right.
and that was 4,000 BC. So 4,000 BC, we have documentation of music, and then in around 1400 BC, we have the melody we just listened to, and it's just the melody that survives. It's none of the instrumental accompaniment. Although, in this band, I think is true to that. They just do the melody, the oral melody.
Yes.
Sometimes people in the past have put musical instrumental accompaniment to create a song and possibly what it could have sounded like.
Like what we saw in the flood.
Right,
where
exactly.
they had the harp.
Right. So I have something else I'd like you to listen to.
Sure.
It's by Malek Jandali, who is a German-born Syrian-American pianist and composer. Yeah, I know, all those
Right.
titles. But the reality is he's a composer, he composes music, he's alive, so he's currently composing music, and he took that very first melody, the hymn to Nikal, and he put it to a full orchestra.
Oh.
So let's
That
give
should
that
be
a
interesting.
listen.
Yeah.
Okay, that piece was called Echoes of Ugarit, and I believe his intention wasn't to create an exact replica
Right.
that's been done so many times,
Right.
and we even heard it from the band just a moment ago.
Yes.
So I think he was just taking the melody and saying, how can I make this an orchestral piece?
Yeah.
And then created an orchestral piece and probably repeated it a couple times and threw some variations. And he has a solo piano version and a full orchestral version. Impressions of that?
I thought it was very cool. I especially liked with the orchestra in the background. It sort of sets the tone. The sort of light plucking, or not plucking, but the light strumming in the back. And then when the orchestra comes in real big, it's has a climactic sort of feel. But I definitely got the impression that it wasn't. I mean, this piece that we just listened to was I don't know, far longer than the actual musical piece. So it was sort of a recycled rendition of the hymn to Nikal. All that being said, I thought it was probably one of the better interpretations that we've heard in terms of a contemporary
spin on the ancient melody.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it, and I think they should do more.
Yeah.
There was one time in an episode previously we listened to a contemporary version of Pindar's Ode, and I like that one too. So I would like to hear composers do more of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to say that the musical composition of the ancients was so distinct from contemporary music that it can't be abstracted upon. And
No.
I think we've evolved so much since this indeed from the hymn to Nikal. We've evolved so much more since then that you can take that melody and do so much more with it.
It's interesting you talk about that because I keep reflecting back on previous episodes and how far we've come and what we've discussed and what we've listened to. And do you remember the episode we listened to? They took ancient Greek instruments and played the Star Wars melody on it?
Yes.
Well, I was listening to that again, and that's in ancient Greek mode. And so it fits that they were playing it on the ancient Greek instruments. And I think John Williams probably chose to do that because it happened a long time ago. Isn't the opening credits of Star Wars say like a long time ago in a galaxy far away? Well, maybe he was trying to give that long time ago feel and wrote it in a Greek melody.
That, and I think the entire series of Star Wars is effectively the hero's journey. I mean, it is as true to ancient Greek playwrights as anything.
Exactly, it's like an Odyssey.
Yeah, it's very Jungian. Right. So, I wouldn't be surprised if John Williams did that intentionally.
Yeah, that's neat. Well, speaking of taking old Greek melodies and putting a contemporary spin on it, the oldest piece of music, the oldest melody was the hymn to Nikal, but the oldest substantial piece of music or song is the Epitaph of Sikilos.
Right.
And someone did an interesting contemporary spin on that piece.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I want you to play that one.
Yeah.
And that's all it was, just a piano arrangement
Yep.
of the melody. Clock's at 40 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it.
Yeah, I actually like it better than some of the more classical Greek ways that we've heard it on the aulos.
Right.
I like it better on the piano. It sounds more like a drinking song, to be perfectly honest, on the piano.
Right, yeah. Yeah, you can certainly imagine being at a smoky bar and a bunch of people sitting in those small circular tables with drinks in their hands.
Right.
and,
Exactly.
a guy up on stage playing the piano.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, that was a nice summary of the BC, the land of BC.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked our way now, and we've crossed the threshold into AD.
Mm-hmm.
Last episode, we explored music in the time of Jesus. That was 180 to 100. Today, I wanted to go into 100 to 200.
Okay.
And the name of this episode, we're going to explore the years 100 to 200, and this episode is called Early Chant.
Okay.
Because we're going to focus and explore some different styles of chant. But before we do that, though, we haven't left the ancient Greeks.
No, we never will.
And they still are composing in this time period. And because there's such little music, such a small repertoire of music from 100 to 200, we gotta take what we can get. And so we still have some composers composing along this time. And since there's such a scarcity, whenever you get anything, you just grab it and cherish it. And the next piece is by Apuleius, who's an ancient Greek novelist.
Oh.
And he wrote a book called The Golden Ass.
Okay.
And I read it some time ago, I'd say about 6 or 7 years ago. And it's about a man who's turned into an ass. And I think the metaphor is perfect. I'm sure you, as well as I, have turned into an ass once or twice in our lives.
Sure.
And that's pretty much the story. And I think a wizard teaches him how to revert back to a normal human being. So I'll have to go back and find out what his lesson is so I can make sure I revert back to a normal human being whenever I turn into an ass.
Right.
But in the book, he describes a rhythm. And so here we have a literal rhythm that was notated in 167 AD. And so it must have been played.
Yeah. Theoretically.
And it's only a small little thing, but, we have to grab onto what we can get during that time period.
Okay.
I think that was 30 seconds long. Very memorable.
Yeah.
And I think in the evolution of music that it fits precisely here.
Well, I think we could probably. I mean, it was rhythmic. Was all it really was. It was a rhythmic shaker.
Right.
It seems to me that this is more primitive than where we ought to be at this point.
Okay.
Just based on some of the music we heard come out of ancient Egypt, even even the hymn to Nakal has more than just a rhythm. So it strikes me as more primitive than where we ought to be.
True. I think maybe the other rhythms that are starting to percolate are harder to notate.
Yes.
And so, therefore, this particular author chose to notate a simple one.
And this, I would say, probably what's unique about this piece is that it was written.
Right.
That this I forget, you said it was Apuleius. He had to have in some fashion, I don't know what it looked like, in some fashion actually inscribed the music that he wants to recreate.
Mm-hmm.
And so there has to be some sort of standard form of notation at this point, whether it's rhythmic or not, or melodic.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There is now some format of writing music
Mm-hmm.
that he put into his book.
Right.
Which is, although the rhythm is primitive,
Mm-hmm.
and the music is primitive in the sense that this is only rhythm. It's sophisticated in the sense that ancient peoples that were focusing on rhythms were probably only focusing on, whole note rhythms, one clap
Mm-hmm.
to inform the listener of a measure.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this is saying, here's one measure, here's another measure, and it's sort of stacked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so but nothing particularly special.
It is not anything particularly special, but it's the very beginning of writing music.
Right.
Musical notation.
Right.
I'm sure the guys sitting around the campfire with their drums and their lyres and their bone flutes and aloes are coming up with some pretty fancy polyrhythms.
Right. Just not writing them down.
Yeah, exactly.
In any organized fashion, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty cool.
Although,
as I said before, I would hazard a guess that far from this being one of the only remaining pieces from that time, I would imagine that there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, more.
Right.
That either we haven't discovered or have just been lost to time.
I think they've been lost.
Yeah.
Especially
like papyrus or whatever.
Very, very little surviving music from the Roman civilization. And when I say little, I think we have 2 fragments.
Right.
Of specific Roman music.
Right. Rome was such a multicultural society that if we have contemporaneous pieces that were made perhaps in Greece at the time of the Romans, that could be considered Roman music.
Because of the influence, there's so much influence
from Rome
that it's hard to distinguish just Greek or
and
just
the same
Roman.
Could be said of what was happening in
Egypt.
Egypt in the eastern part of the empire, or in the western part of the empire in the Iberian Peninsula. And
that's a good point.
Germanic. So I would there's probably nothing that survives because of the sack of Rome and the Italian peninsula, that Italian Roman music is probably gone.
Yeah.
But I would suspect it's not too distant cousin. The Greek music is probably the authentic, an authentic replication of what Roman music likely sounded like.
Well, since you bring that up, the next piece or pieces of music I want to listen to are from the city of Oxyrhynchus, which is somewhere along the Nile, I believe in Egypt, and they had an excavation there and found a whole series of papyrus, and they found a whole bunch of Egyptian music, Egyptian/Greek music.
Yeah, Ptolemaic Egyptian.
Yeah, exactly. So we can listen to 1 or 2 of these. So look at that. There's there's 13 of them here, and they're all dated around the 2nd century AD, which is 100 to 200.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we just listened to 2 pieces from the Oxyrhynchus papyrus. They're both fragments. My guess is that they may have done some repetition because they were a little extended.
Yeah, yeah. I would imagine if most of these are fragments, then yeah, they probably filled in the gaps.
Yeah,
or
repeat them a little bit
to
give it like a sense that they're playing a tune.
Right.
And not just here's clink clink clink.
Mm-hmm.
That's my guess. Any impressions?
The only impression that I have really is that this is very reminiscent of some of the music that we heard from the ancient Greeks.
Right.
Which doesn't surprise me. I mean, this is Ptolemaic Egypt at this point. So the influence of the Greek culture, of the Hellenistic culture in Egypt is pretty evident.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point I was making earlier, this is what I think of when I think of Roman music. Although this was found in Egypt, this is dated around the time of the Roman occupation of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
This is likely what Roman music would have probably sounded like.
Right.
The influences I think coming from Hellenistic Greece.
Right.
Informing some of earlier Roman culture. But it seemed very Greek.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it was my initial impression.
Right. You mentioned Ptolemy 2 times, and it's interesting that you bring him up because he had some significant influence during this time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hand me that device?
Sure.
I found this in my garage, and it's perfect because I wanted to talk about this. Finally figured out what Pythagoras had set his hands on. And what Pythagoras was instrumenting is that he wanted music to have a particular structure, and that structure was based on the ratio 3:2.
Okay.
And I'm not very good at math, so I kind of just went with it and assumed I knew what he meant, but I really didn't. I figured it out though, and I'm going to use my middle finger only because it's the longest.
Sure.
Our middle finger is divided into 3 equal segments, and if you play a string the length of 2 of those segments, that's creates what's called in music a perfect fifth.
Okay.
And that's the ratio he wanted us to focus on in music, because that is the ratio that the body is made.
Mm-hmm.
And I found these. These are the golden mean calipers. And it's a pretty interesting device. Check this out. Like if I were to go from here to here, you get the calipers pointing to this part of my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And if I flip it around this way, it points to my elbow.
Mm-hmm.
And then and that's as wide as it can go. And I don't know if we saw that on a video, but here, if I close the gap and I do this, can you see that?
Yeah.
From the palm of my hand and then to the fingers, this joint right here is the golden mean.
Okay.
And then if I close it up again, and I get that same ratio with the finger, and then I could flip it,
right,
and I get it again.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
It is wild.
Yeah, and so that's what Pythagoras was going for. He was going for, you have the length of the string, and you play it, and that's one note, and then you play two segments of the string divided into equal thirds, and then that segment would give you the perfect fifth, according to today's theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Now, why I bring that up, I finally figured that out. Ptolemy said, I want to introduce thirds. And so he divided the scale not just by fifths, what Pythagoras was doing, he divided it into thirds. And so that gave a different sort of tuning to the instruments and to the scales.
Right, right.
That's as far as my knowledge goes.
It's pretty neat.
With that.
It's not a surprise then that part of some of the other pieces that we had listened to from the Berlin papyrus includes mathematics. You would suspect a mathematician would also be reflecting on music.
Yes, right.
And so if there's mathematics and equations, perhaps those equations are helping to inform the song that came off of that papyrus.
Yes, exactly, and I'm glad you mentioned that. The mathematics that Pythagoras was going for sprung from the ratio of how the body was constructed. The mathematics that Ptolemy was going for sprung from the movement of celestial bodies. And he took the ratios of the sun to the earth and the planets to the earth and put those into musical ratios. And that's what influenced his particular mathematics and musical style.
That's interesting. I wonder how that would change if when we introduce the Copernican model. Because I don't think Ptolemy, they were still thinking that the Earth...
Yeah, it was a geocentric model.
Yeah. So I wonder.
I don't know. Let me look up this guy. Okay, so the next set of pieces that we have are hymns from a composer named Mesomedes, and he was writing these around the late 2nd century, and up until they discovered the epitaph of Sikylos, these were considered the oldest pieces of music. So they're treasured examples of ancient Greek music. So we listened to a piece by Mazamades, the Hymn to the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we listened to a contemporary tribute, we'll say, of the Hymn to the Sun. And it was, or was it Hymn to the Muse?
Hymn to the Muse.
Hymn to the Muse. Thank you. Yeah. Both of them were hymn. The first one was Hymn to the Muse as it's written on the papyrus that Mazamades composed, and the Kyrillos Ensemble recreated it as they hope a Greek person or Egyptian person would hear it back in 100 AD. And then we heard Steph Connor, who is known because we've had her on several occasions, and we listened to The Flood was one of my favorites by her, introduction to her. And she does a chill, one of the songs was on a chill album, and she does a contemporary version with some synthesizers in the background. And she had some nice vocal textures towards the end there as she finished off the piece. What are your impressions about Mazamades?
I think it's a much more refined piece of Greek music, even though it was found in Egypt. I would consider this to be, or was this not found in Egypt?
Well, Mazamades was a Greek poet and composer.
Okay, so yeah, I would say that this is a more refined piece of Greek music than what we've heard before. And the chill version, I think you said it best, that she didn't really do too much to alter the piece to make it uniquely her own.
Right.
Which is something that I think is commonplace in a lot of the ancient musical traditions, is that Mazzomedes might write the piece. That doesn't necessarily mean he's the only person that will ever play that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's something to be said about the diversity of instrumentation for a single piece of music that we're not, I don't think we're getting from the chill version of the song. But the ancient version of the song, like I said, I think was much more refined than what we had heard from some of the others that we had listened to, whose names escape me. That's like Sappho. The Sappho music was a little bit more, I don't know, not quite organized enough.
Right.
So.
Before we move away from Greek and Egypt, we're gonna dip into Coptic chants.
Yes.
What do you know about the Coptics tradition? Because I don't know a whole lot about them.
As far as I found in my research, it's very similar to Greek Orthodox in their sort of traditions. I think their calendar, they have a unique calendar that is more along the lines of the Greek Orthodox, where Christmas and Catholicism and most Protestant traditions tends to fall in December. The ones for the Greek Orthodox, and I believe for the Coptics as well, it tends to vary throughout the year, I think, depending on maybe where the sun is at a given point of time, or where the moon is. I can't recall. I do know that they have a head of church, similar to how there's a pope in Catholicism. There's a head of the Coptic church. I don't remember exactly what his title is, but he resides in Egypt. And there are other things, I think, that are pretty unique to the Coptics that are I mean, I was raised in terms of Protestant traditions, so I think the Coptics are a little bit more true to what I would say to be original Christianity.
Right. This is now where we're experiencing a rise in Christianity, correct?
Yes.
And then we're starting to have organized, how do I say it?
Congregations?
Yeah, that's, I think, the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
They're not hiding anymore. It's not cult as in secretive. It's not I don't think it's illegal anymore. So I think they're starting to become more visible. And like you said, they're congregating and having open public, not necessarily public like out in the open, but I mean, obviously they started having churches.
Yeah.
And they're starting to chant and worship in the churches.
Yeah. Yeah, and I as I recall, I'm pretty sure the Coptics are one of the original Christian traditions.
Right.
Which is why I say, I think of all of the Christianity in the world today, the Coptics are probably most likely to be original to early Christian teachings.
Now, there's a prayer or hymn, and it's a Christian hymn, and it is found in the Oxyrhynchus Papyrus, and it is officially considered the oldest Christian hymn. Now, we're not going to listen to that today because it's got a dating on it, and it falls within 200 to 300.
Yeah.
And we're doing 100 to 200 today. But I'm choosing to start listening to the Coptics because their tradition goes all the way back to right around this time period, and so we're probably hearing some melodies that originated around this time and are Christian oriented and are Coptic.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know because Christians, early Christians weren't. I mean, they've come from previous other traditions, right? The apostles were all Jews, right? So the earliest Christians, if you can consider the apostles the earliest Christians, would have musical inspiration that derives from some of the stuff that we heard from Judaism.
Yeah.
Like the Psalms, for example.
Right, yeah.
And I wonder what...
And those wedding songs.
Right, and I wonder, since the Coptics, I don't know where they founded the Coptic Church, where that would have ultimately been, but I wonder if a lot of their traditions come from sort of pagan traditions that have been abstracted onto the theology of Christianity at the time. And so the music that we're hearing from the Coptic chanting may be more inspired by tribal chanting of the tribes that were existing in the area that are not Jewish. Right, so...
Yeah. Well...
Curious.
Yeah, exactly. Would you like to split a Kit Kat?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. Even if it's a dark Kit Kat?
No, I'll give it a try.
Alright, give it a dark Kit Kat a try. This one's... They want to make sure we know that this one's extra large.
Yeah, right.
As if, the size...
It wasn't quite obvious.
Exactly. Maybe
well, at the time, we are here with the time of the Greeks, so I mean, perhaps there's something to be said of the sophistry. We perhaps should not trust our eyes. So, thank you.
Okay, I'll tell you what stands out for me is a musical evolution in that up until now, you had pointed out that there was usually one syllable, tung, run, tung, ha, and it was very structured. The music met and coincided with the vocal and the syllables.
Yeah.
Now we're getting what's called in music a melisma. That's when you have more than one note for a single syllable. So I may say, thank you, and I'll say thank you, and that's exactly what they're doing here. They're doing that and they're really stretching out the words, and you're getting what is called a melisma. So you're getting very melismatic music now, or chanting, which we hadn't had up until now, I don't believe.
Well, not in any, I don't think, any structured way.
Right.
We examined the Bushmen, which had a sort of chant quality to it, and some of the tribes.
Well, the chanting we've had up until now, but the melisma I don't think we've had so pronounced anyways.
Right. I mean, I think chanting that we had before wasn't lyrical chanting.
Right.
Where here we have more of a... Now, I would say that I think maybe the ancient Hebrew tradition has some of that.
Okay.
I don't know enough ancient Hebrew to know.
Well, it sounded very Hebrew as well.
Yes, which makes sense. That
they would borrow that.
Right. There were probably plenty of Jews that were living in the Levant at the time. To my earlier point about the establishment of the Coptic Church, it was the traditions say that it was founded by Mark the Apostle in Alexandria, and it spread south into the Nubian kingdoms.
Okay.
So it stands to reason that Egypt likely had a very large Jewish population. They were probably among the first converts. And then as you spread south into the Nubian kingdoms, which have their own, and in fact I think we explored some of the Nubian Egyptian music at one point.
We did.
Which have their own cultures and musical traditions. You start to see a mesh, a meld of the two.
Right.
And so perhaps the chanting quality that we get with the, is it melasmic?
Yes.
Melismatic
right.
Quality of the Hebrew music at the time in terms of their liturgical pronouncements.
And it had also a very Egyptian influence as well.
Yes, in terms of the note quality.
Yeah.
It had that very standard. I think we've used the phrase before. It feels very Arab, and it does. While also, I think, melding the other two cultures, the ancient Hebrews and perhaps the Nubian kingdoms as well.
Well, that CD that track we just listened to came from the CD of traditional Coptic liturgies. There's another CD that we're going to explore of traditional Coptic hymns.
Okay.
Okay, we explored an album of Coptic hymns.
Yes.
And it's just so interesting in how blatantly Egypt and blatantly Hebraic were just brought together in one piece.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it speaks to a new tradition, right? It is the melding of multiple previous traditions into a newfound tradition. And they established their own language, which we found out no longer exists.
Right, right.
But yeah, I think it takes elements of things that we've already explored and combines them. Which is interesting because I think up until now we've sort of siloed each of the different Mediterranean cultures at the time and sort of see how they stand apart, how they're similar. Yeah. And here we're saying, okay, what happens if we bump them together?
Right.
We've got all the elements around, right? The Hebraic, the Nubians, the Egyptian. What if we just combine them all together? What does that sound like?
Yeah.
In sort of the music theory written format of the Greeks, right? So you take the Greeks, you take all the elements of the Mediterranean cultures, and you bundle them together, and we get Coptic chanting. So.
What do you know about the Byzantine Empire?
Very little. I know that it's Greek Orthodox.
I know that they look them up because we're going to transition to the.
Yes. Okay. I think they are the successors of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople being their capital.
We're moving over to the Byzantine Empire.
So the Byzantine Empire is traditionally referred to as the Eastern Roman Empire. Once the Western Roman Empire fell, all that really remained was the Eastern. At this point, Constantinople was the established capital city for the Constantine. The famous, in fact, Constantinople named for Constantine, the famous Roman emperor who converted to Christianity on his deathbed, and the reason being was to quell the sort of rife between the pagans who were at the time brutalizing the Christians. So as we were talking about earlier, the Christians were coming out into the open, and the pagans didn't like it, and so they were trying to kill, oftentimes persecuting the Christians for being Christians, and Constantine converted, the theory goes, to try to stop that.
Right.
Once the Western Roman Empire falls, the Eastern Roman Empire remains, and it is now traditionally called the Byzantine Empire, and establishes its its traditions in what is commonly, I'd say, Greek Orthodox. So very similar in practice to the Coptics, but I'd say a little bit culturally different.
And musically different.
Yes.
Here we just explored an album of traditional Byzantine chant, and it really highlights the solo voice. The words are more distinct, it seems.
Yeah, a little bit more Greek.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit more like the Mezzomedes that we heard earlier.
Right. I noticed that too.
Mm-hmm. While still maintaining. So again, it's sort of if we're looking at the melding of cultures at this point, Coptics are sort of the meld of Judaic and Egyptian, and here we have Judaic and Greek.
Right, yeah, okay.
And that's why we're getting that sort of melismatic singing with the Greek mode and soloing.
Yeah. Oh, that's really intense.
But contemporary, right? Parallel and contemporary, which is interesting.
That brings us to the conclusion of the pieces I wanted to listen to. The time period 100 to 200 AD. We listened to Apuleius. We listened to Mezzomedes. We explored the Oxyrhynchus papyrus. Still some remnants of authentic ancient Greek music. Then we listened to some Coptic chants. And we ended with some traditional Byzantine chants. Do you have any last words for the entire canon that we listened to?
I mean, I think we're getting to this point now, and it is interesting that we started this episode listening to the ancient Greeks and also some renditions of the hymn to Nikal, because the hymn to Nikal, I would say, finds its or let me say it differently. The Coptic traditions finds its roots in the hymn to Nikal, whereas the Byzantine finds its roots in the ancient Greeks. And so we sort of began this piece already exploring the parallels of the two that will ultimately become contemporaneous. So I'd say that we're in terms of societal evolution, cultural evolution, we're at a very interesting point in time.
I think I'm going to call that a synchronicity.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Would you recommend anything to a friend?
No.
No.
No, I wouldn't.
This is hard stuff. This is hardcore stuff, you know?
I think you have to be a pretty devout Coptic Christian or Greek Orthodox.
Or music history aficionado.
to find any value. Now, that being said, the ancient Greek chill version I would recommend to spa owners, if there are any listening. As sort of background music, because it was quite nice.
It was. It was very tranquil and peaceful.
Yes. But no, I wouldn't. There's no piece that I would say to any of my friends. You really have to hear this. It is the coolest. No, and in fact, I think in some ways we've reverted. Right, when we were exploring the hydraulis and some of the things that the Romans and the Greeks were doing at the time, I think we had gotten to a point where we had mapped out notes on a keyboard, and we had established a sort of written method for music notation, and we're creating rhythms over top of melodies that are complex melodies. And I think now that we've gotten all of that, we've gone to a point now where all of that is sort of secondary to the liturgy of the pieces that are now surviving the musical traditions of the time.
Yes, what we're going to notice and discover is that it's you mentioned last week, maybe our viewer will go back and rewatch last week. You mentioned that last week we have the foundation for Western music to soar. We've got the instruments, we've got the music theory, string instruments, keyboard instruments, wind instruments, reed instruments, percussion instruments. We got the music theory down, the rhythm, the melody, the harmony, and everything is ready to launch. And you know what we're going to find? We're going to find that this new wave arises of Christianity, and in order to differentiate themselves from the pagans, they're going to distance themselves from the music.
Yes.
And so, how do you differentiate yourself from another group? You want to do what they're not doing. And so what did they do? They used instruments, then we're going to just use voices. They played outside in the public square. We're going to sing inside the churches.
I also wonder if it's now this could be said,
and that's going to happen, and that's going to stay that way for hundreds of years.
Well, and I think also, you got to think at this point, the populations of a lot of these cities has skyrocketed. If we're thinking about ancient Athens, it's nothing compared to where Jerusalem was at this time. Jerusalem is a huge epicenter. I wonder if there was more accessibility to education in ancient Greece while we had these siloed cultures that weren't being involved in sort of a Mediterranean conflict.
I see that.
Where maybe we have all the foundations of music leaving the Roman Empire, but we don't have the number of smart people to go and create. We don't have those types. We don't have a Sappho
access to schools,
or a Mesomades. We don't have these people. They're not as common anymore because the access is so limited.
Right. Yeah.
So. Food for thought, but maybe we'll see more.
Okay. And maybe you'll see more again if you keep watching us. Until next time,
stay tuned.